I was elbow deep in a sink full of dog hair and lukewarm water when my phone started buzzing against the counter, and I almost didn't hear it over the blow dryer. It was a Thursday in March, the kind of gray afternoon that smelled like wet towels and oatmeal shampoo. And I had a golden retriever named Biscuit half asleep under my hands, while his owner waited up front reading a magazine. I work at a grooming salon outside Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of place with a bell on the door and a coffee pot that's always half full. I love it more than I've ever loved anything I was supposedly meant for. I let the call go to voicemail the first time. The second time, something in my chest tightened, and I dried my hands on my apron and answered. Is this Ren Castellane? No one had called me that, my full name, Ren Marguerite Castellane, since my grandmother used to say it slowly, drawing out each syllable, whenever she was pretending to be stern with me. The man on the phone introduced himself as an attorney. He said there had been an accident on the parkway outside Black Mountain. He said my grandparents, Walter and June Castellane, were gone. I don't remember hanging up. I remember Biscuit's wet nose pressing into my palm, like even the dog knew something in the room had broken. To understand what happened after, you have to understand the family I came from, because from a distance, we looked like something out of a holiday catalog. My parents, my father Desmond and my mother Corrine, lived in a brick colonial in one of those Charlotte suburbs, with a name like an English countryside that never existed. Foxgrove Estates, or something equally invented. My father ran a regional insurance brokerage and wore the kind of watch that costs more than my car. My mother sat on the board of 2 country clubs and once cried, actually cried, because the caterer used the wrong shade of ivory for her luncheon napkins. I have an older brother, Holden, by 3 years. Holden was always the son my parents had been auditioning for in their heads before he was even born. He was captain of his lacrosse team. He went to business school. He knew, instinctively, the exact way to laugh at my father's jokes, so my father felt important. I was the quiet one, the one who liked dogs and rainstorms and taking things apart to see how they worked. At family dinners I was mostly furniture. My mother used to say, not unkindly, just absently, Ren marches to her own little drum, the way you describe a pet's quirky habit. The only place I ever felt like a whole person was at my grandparents' farmhouse. 40 minutes outside Asheville, tucked into the hills off a gravel road that turned to mud every spring. My grandfather Walter had built a small but mighty business from absolutely nothing. Castellane Orchard and Cider Co., starting with 11 apple trees and a hand-crank press in his barn. By the time I was born, it had grown into a regional brand sold in 3 states. But he never once acted like a man who'd made it. He still wore the same flannel jacket with the torn elbow. My grandmother June ran the books and grew dahlias the size of dinner plates along the porch rail. My father was embarrassed by them in that quiet, corrosive way. Some people are embarrassed by where they came from. He called the farmhouse the compound, with a little laugh that wasn't really a laugh. He made comments at Thanksgiving about my grandfather's truck, the rust on the tailgate, my grandmother reusing tinfoil. He never said it outright, but the message landed every time. These people are beneath what we've built ourselves into. Conveniently forgotten was the fact that Walter and June had co-signed the loan on my father's first office space. Forgotten was the fact that every time my father's brokerage hit a rough patch, and it had, twice, it was quietly, wordlessly, my grandparents who caught him. They never once threw it back in his face. Not in front of me, anyway. I spent every summer of my childhood at that farmhouse. My grandmother taught me to can peaches and to look a person dead in the eye when they were talking to me, because, she said, people who can't hold eye contact are usually hiding something, even from themselves. My grandfather taught me to graft apple branches, to read weather in the color of the sky, and that a handshake from an honest man was worth more than a stack of paperwork from a dishonest one. When I told my parents, at 22, that I wanted to train as a veterinary groomer, instead of finishing the business degree they'd already mapped out for me, my mother set down her wine glass very carefully, the way she did when she was composing her face. What's, Ren, she said, you have options. My father said flatly, we're not paying for that nonsense. And they didn't, my grandparents did, without a single condition attached. My grandmother mailed me a card the week I started the program, her handwriting slanted and looping across the page. We are so proud of the woman you're becoming. The world needs people who are gentle with living things. You always have been. I taped that card to the inside of my closet door. I still have it. I built a small life in Asheville. A 1-bedroom apartment above a bakery, a used Honda with a check engine light that never went off, and a job I loved more than I'd ever loved an A on a report card. My parents called occasionally, usually to mention some achievement of Holden's, or to remind me my cousin Priscilla was getting married and I'd need to wear something that doesn't look like you slept in it. They never once asked what breed of dog I'd groomed that week, or whether I was happy. Every Sunday for almost 8 years, I drove out to the farmhouse for dinner. I missed maybe 4 of them, total, in all that time, and only because I was sick. The funeral was everything the rest of my family was. glossy, rehearsed, hollow at the center. My mother wore a black hat with a brim wide enough to block out a small sun. My father delivered a eulogy that sounded suspiciously like a LinkedIn summary. Holden stood in the receiving line, accepting condolences with a grief he had not actually earned. Cousins and second cousins I hadn't seen since middle school murmured about what extraordinary people Walter and June had been. Extraordinary people none of them had visited more than twice in the last decade. I stood near the back of the chapel and cried quietly, and nobody noticed, and somehow that felt about right. 2 weeks later we were summoned to the office of an estate attorney named Harlan Whitcomb, on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown with a view of the river. The office smelled like leather and old paper. My father sat with the posture of a man already redesigning the place in his head. My mother's hand sat folded primly in her lap, nails the color of dried blood. Holden kept glancing toward the door, like he expected something better might walk through it at any moment. Harlan read through the preliminary language. I barely absorbed a word of it. I was staring at a black and white photograph on the wall. An orchard in fog, trying not to come apart in a room full of people who would have judged me for it. Then Harlan said, "The entirety of the estate, including all shares of Castellane Orchard and Cider Co., the property at 118 Hollow Bend Road, and all liquid and investment holdings, valued at an estimated $29 million, is bequeathed in full to one beneficiary." The room seemed to tilt. Reine Marguerite Castellane is the sole heir. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever sat inside of. My father's face moved through several distinct stages in under 5 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, something close to fury. "Say that again," he said, his voice scraped thin with control. Harlan didn't say it again. He simply slid the document across the table. My mother's composure went first. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, and there was nothing graceful in how she said it. They were old, confused. She was out there every week, filling their heads with. They anticipated that question, Harlan said evenly. He turned his laptop toward us. My grandparents appeared on the screen, sitting together on the porch swing, the one with the chipped white paint I'd repainted myself 2 summers ago. My grandfather had his hand resting over my grandmother's. They looked smaller than I remembered, but their eyes were clear, present, entirely themselves. "Well," my grandfather said, "if you're watching this, we've gone and kicked the bucket, and I hope we didn't leave too big a mess behind." My grandmother swatted his arm without looking away from the camera, smiling despite herself. Even from beyond, they made me laugh through tears. "We made this decision with sound minds and full hearts," my grandmother said. "We thought long and hard about what it means to leave something behind. And we realized it was never about the money. It was always about what kind of people we'd raised, and who actually showed up." My grandfather cleared his throat. "Desmond. Karine. You're our son and daughter, and we love you. But love and trust aren't the same thing, and it took us a long time to understand that. We watched how you treated this family. We watched how you treated this orchard, this money, the people who worked it. We watched how you treated people who couldn't do a single thing for you in return. We saw it all." My grandmother looked directly into the lens, and it felt like she was looking straight through the screen at me. "And we saw Ren. She came every single Sunday for 8 years. She never once asked us for a thing. She helped me deadhead the dahlias until her hands were stained green. She sat with your father in that barn for hours, just to keep him company while he worked. She is the one who kept this family's heart beating, after everyone else stopped checking, so she will be the one who carries what we built forward." The screen went dark. I won't describe everything that happened in that office in the minutes after, except to say it was not brief, and it was not quiet. My father used language I'd never heard him use outside of a closed car window. My mother wept in a way that had nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with arithmetic. Holden looked at me with a contempt so clean it was almost a relief, because at least it was honest. They summoned me to my parents' house that evening. I went, some small foolish part of me still hoping there was something left to salvage. There wasn't. My father had paperwork waiting on the dining table, a transfer of administrative authority. They would manage the estate, he explained, and I would receive a generous allotment. He used those exact words. 12%. "You groom dogs for a living, Ren," my mother said, like she was reading a diagnosis off a chart. "You cannot run a multi-state agricultural business. This is the responsible thing. This is us protecting you." I looked down at the papers. I thought of my grandmother's voice on that screen. She is the one who kept this family's heart beating. "No," I said. It escalated quickly after that. Holden slammed a kitchen cabinet hard enough to rattle the glasses inside it. My father told me that if I left that house without signing, I was finished. No holidays, no phone calls, dead to the family, his words, like I was a line item he was striking from a ledger. I left anyway. I found out within the hour that my father owned the building my apartment sat in, quietly, through a holding company called Brightridge Properties LLC, something I had never once been told. A text arrived not 20 minutes later. A formal notice to vacate, effective by morning. I packed what mattered. Clothes, a few books, the letters my grandmother had sent over the years, and the quilt she'd hand-stitched for me when I left for trade school, made from scraps of her old garden dresses and squares of my grandfather's worn-out flannels. As I carried the last box to my car, my father was standing on the sidewalk under the street lamp, arms crossed. He told me I had been an accident, a mistake made early in their marriage. He said they'd been happier before me. He said I had done nothing in 26 years but complicate a life that wasn't mine to complicate. I got in the car. I drove toward the farmhouse, the only direction that had ever felt like home. Harlan Whitcomb was on the porch the next morning with 2 coffees and a paper bag of biscuits from the bakery in town. He'd called all night, he said. And when I never picked up, he figured I'd ended up exactly where I belonged. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me what my grandparents had spent nearly 5 years quietly building. One folder, then another, my grandmother's journals, documenting every loan my father had ever taken from them and never repaid. Every cruel comment relayed back to her by a cousin who'd overheard it. Every time my Aunt Brigitte had cried about money, and then posted photos from a resort in Cabo 2 weeks later, there were records of a $310,000 loan to my father, co-signed by my grandfather 6 years earlier, never repaid, hidden carefully from his own business partners. And then Harlan opened his laptop and showed me the security footage. 2 days after the funeral, my parents had let themselves into the farmhouse with a spare key they weren't supposed to have. On camera, my mother walked straight to the hallway bookshelf, slid out a false panel behind a row of old encyclopedias, and opened a small fireproof lockbox hidden there. She removed my grandmother's sapphire earrings, the ruby brooch she wore every Christmas Eve, and a gold pocket watch that had belonged to my great-grandfather. My father stood by the window the entire time, arms folded, watching the road. My grandparents had installed that camera years earlier, specifically because they were afraid of exactly this. They had thought of everything. Medical evaluation confirming their full mental competency, signed within 4 months of the accident, affidavits from their pastor, their family doctor, and a neighbor of nearly 30 years. They had built a fortress around their wishes, and then they had quietly handed me the key. In the days that followed, the people my grandparents had trusted began arriving. One by one, the way reinforcements show up after a battle has already started without them. Marjorie, my grandmother's closest friend of almost 4 decades, brought a second set of journals and enough chicken pot pie to feed half the county. Otis, who had managed my grandfather's orchard crew for 19 years, arrived and recounted the time he'd overheard my father on the phone calling Walter, a tight-fisted old fool who needs to hurry up and die already. Reuben, my grandfather's longtime business partner, spread financial records across the kitchen table, with a quiet, controlled fury I had never seen in him before. And then there was Judge Eleanor Marsh, who had grown up 2 farms over from my grandparents, and arrived in a navy blazer, saying simply, "Walter called in every favor I owed him. Let me return it now." When my father, mother, and Holden showed up the following morning, expecting to find me alone and easy to corner, they found a kitchen table crowded with people instead. A retired judge, a former orchard foreman with nothing left to lose, a business partner with neat, devastating stacks of paper. My father tried his usual theatrics, pointing at me, calling it a setup, calling it a circus. Harlan let him finish. Then he opened the laptop again. They watched themselves on the security footage. My mother went completely still. The kind of stillness that comes right before something inside a person cracks. Reuben slid the loan documents across the table without a word. The kitchen went silent in the specific way a room goes silent, when everyone in it already knows the argument is over. I looked at my father. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time in my entire life, and I didn't see the imposing figure I'd spent 26 years trying to earn approval from. I saw a frightened, grasping man who had never once stopped to ask what kind of person he'd let himself become. "You didn't come here to protect me," I said. "You came here because you were scared I'd become someone you couldn't manage anymore. You spent my whole life making me feel like an afterthought. But the 2 people who actually knew me, who watched all of us for 50 years, chose me. I don't think you'll ever say it out loud, but that has to mean something to you." My father had nothing to say back. My mother was crying, and for the first time in my life, it looked like it might actually be real. They left without another word. The door clicked shut behind them, and the whole house seemed to exhale at once. The months after were full in a way I hadn't expected grief to ever allow. Harlan walked me through the legal process with more patience than I deserved. Reuben taught me the orchard business from the soil up. Not so I could run daily operations myself, since he was already more than capable of that, but because my grandfather had always believed a person who doesn't understand the labor underneath a business has no business leading it. I learned what it cost a seasonal picker to live 40 minutes from the nearest grocery store. I learned why my grandfather kept a coffee pot going in the barn, year-round and never locked his office door. Tucked in a drawer in my grandfather's desk, I found something they'd been quietly drafting for almost 2 years, the framework of a foundation. The Walter and June Castellane Community Fund. Their vision was specific and entirely without pretension. Scholarships for first-generation college students from rural counties across the western part of the state. An emergency fund for seasonal farm workers between harvests, and grants to keep small-town animal shelters from shutting their doors. I put $6 million into it within the first year. I kept grooming dogs. I want to be clear about that part, because it matters to me. I still show up 3 mornings a week to a salon that smells like oatmeal shampoo and wet fur. To dogs who don't care what my bank account looks like, who are just glad someone is being gentle with them. The money changed what I was able to do for people. It never changed why I got up in the morning. When a regular client mentioned she couldn't afford her senior dog's dental surgery, I could quietly cover it. When the shelter 2 towns over was about to lose its lease, we made sure it didn't. I live at the farmhouse now. It still smells like wood smoke and coffee grounds. The dahlias come back along the porch rail every June, somehow bigger than the year before. My grandfather's tools still hang in the barn exactly where he left them, organized by size, and I haven't moved a single one. On Sundays, my kitchen table is full again. Marjorie, Otis, Reuben, and his wife, Harlan, who has become something close to an uncle I never had. A few co-workers from the salon, neighbors, a loud, imperfect, constantly rotating group of people who loved the same 2 people I loved, and who decided to keep showing up for each other after they were gone. Nothing about these dinners resembles the dinners I grew up with. Nobody performs. Nobody keeps score. We talk over each other and laugh too loud at things that probably aren't that funny and about college football, until somebody's dog starts barking at us to stop. This is what my grandparents actually left me. Not $29 million. They left me proof that a life built honestly compounds, quietly, over years, in ways you can't always see while it's happening. Every fair deal my grandfather made. Every worker he paid a little more than he had to. Every neighbor he helped without being asked. None of it came back to him directly. He never needed it to. It came back to me instead, in the form of a kitchen table full of people willing to stand up and say so when it actually cost them something. They left me the understanding that real wealth was never about what you hold on to. It's about what you build inside other people. It's the senior dog who gets to keep his teeth. It's the kid from a town with 1 stoplight who gets to go to college, because someone he never met decided he was worth the investment. It's a Sunday table where nobody has to earn the right to sit down. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, if you know what it feels like to grow up surrounded by people who treated you like an afterthought instead of a person, I want you to hear this. The people who actually see you are out there somewhere. Sometimes they're not the ones you'd expect. Sometimes they're the ones everybody else overlooks completely. And sometimes the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally will show you exactly who they are. And the bravest thing you can do is believe them the first time. Stop auditioning for people who already made up their minds about you a long time ago. Go find your Sunday table.